The millionaire walked in unannounced, and what she saw the black janitor doing changed her life forever. Victoria Sterling froze in the doorway of her executive office when she caught David Johnson, the night janitor, sitting in her Italian leather chair, typing furiously on her personal computer. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she exploded, dropping her Hermes bag on the floor. It was 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday night, and she had returned to Sterling Holdings to retrieve some forgotten documents. She never expected to find the cleaning employee rummaging through her private files. David looked up calmly, showing none of the panic that any normal person would feel when caught red-handed. At 34, he had been cleaning those offices for 3 years, always invisible, always underestimated. But at that moment, something in his gaze made Victoria instinctively recoil. "Good evening, Miss Sterling," he said, saving what he was typing with deliberately slow movements. "I was just finishing some calculations." "Calculations?" she yelled, approaching the desk. "You're fired. I'm calling security right now." But David didn't move. Instead, he turned the monitor toward her. The spreadsheet on the screen showed numbers that made her blood run cold. Bank transfers, offshore accounts, transactions she thought were buried forever in the depths of the company's accounting. "Interesting how numbers don't lie, huh?" he murmured, a barely perceptible smile on his lips. "Especially when you know where to look." Victoria felt the floor disappear beneath her feet. Those documents were on a secure server accessible only by her personal password. How on earth could a simple janitor? The flashback came like a wave. 3 months ago, during a board meeting, she had humiliated David in front of all the executives. He was cleaning the room when she interrupted the presentation. "Can you stop there and clean properly this time? It seems you can't even learn the simplest tasks." Awkward laughter echoed around the room as David lowered his head and continued working in silence. That day, she didn't notice how he watched everything with meticulous attention. She didn't notice how his eyes captured every password typed, every whispered conversation, every document left open on the table. Now, in front of the computer, David stood up slowly, adjusting his cleaning uniform. "You know, Miss Sterling, I always knew you considered me invisible. And I've discovered that being invisible has its advantages." Her heart raced as he pulled a flash drive from his pocket. 3 years collecting evidence, 3 years listening to conversations you thought no one else was hearing, 3 years documenting every law you broke. For a moment, Victoria's natural arrogance fought against her growing fear. "You don't have the guts to what? Hand this over to the FBI." David dangled the flash drive between his fingers, or maybe the newspaper, or perhaps post it all on social media. The possibilities are endless when you have information that can destroy an empire built on fraud and money laundering. A heavy silence filled the office. Outside, the skyscrapers of Manhattan shone indifferent to the drama unfolding on the 45th floor. Victoria Sterling, who had always controlled everything and everyone around her, realized for the first time in her life that she was completely in the hands of someone she considered disposable. David walked toward the door, pausing only to look at her over his shoulder. "Oh, and Miss Sterling, tomorrow, I'll be back to my normal cleaning schedule. After all, there's still a lot of dirt to clean up around here." He left her alone with a question hammering in her mind. If a simple janitor had managed to uncover her darkest secrets, what other ghosts were about to come out of the closet? If you're enjoying discovering how David turned years of humiliation into his secret weapon, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, because this story of revenge is just beginning, and what's to come will show that underestimating the right people can cost much more than just the loss of a job. Victoria Sterling didn't sleep a wink that night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw David's controlled smile and that flash drive dangling between his fingers like a death sentence. By 6 a.m., she was already on the phone with Marcus Wellington, her head of corporate security and former FBI investigator. "I want this guy investigated down to the last penny he's ever earned in his life," she growled, pacing back and forth in her penthouse apartment. "Full name is David Johnson. He's been working in cleaning for 3 years. Find out everything: where he lives, who he hangs out with, what kind of cars he drives, how many kids he has, everything." Marcus quickly jotted it down. "Do you want me to treat this as a red-level security threat?" "I want you to treat it like war," she snapped. "This man cannot work anywhere in Manhattan after I'm done with him. I will destroy any chance he has of ever getting a job again." 2 hours later, she was in the office calling an emergency meeting with the Human Resources Department. Rachel, the HR director, entered the room nervously, carrying a thick folder. "Miss Sterling, About David Johnson, he hasn't technically done anything that warrants termination for cause. He has an impeccable 3-year record. Never missed a day. Never had any complaints. I don't care, Victoria exploded, slamming her hand on the table. I want him out of here today. Make something up, theft, insubordination, inappropriate behavior, I don't care. Rachel swallowed hard. Miss Sterling, if we do this without legal justification, he could sue the company for discriminatory dismissal. Let me explain something to you. Victoria leaned over the table, her voice cutting like ice. I built this company from the ground up. I decide who comes in and who goes out. And if you can't find a legal way to get this, she paused, choosing her words carefully, this problem out of my company, I may need to find someone more competent for your position. The message was clear. Rachel left the room with her hands shaking. Meanwhile, 3 floors below, David arrived for another normal day at work. Or at least that's what it seemed like. He greeted the security guards with his usual politeness, picked up his cleaning cart, and began his routine in the smaller offices. But if anyone had been watching closely, they would have noticed small details that were different. The way he discreetly checked the corners where he had installed micro-recorders months ago. How his eyes captured every whispered conversation between executives. How he memorized schedules and movements that had previously gone unnoticed. David Johnson was 34 years old, but his story began long before that company. Raised by a grandmother who cleaned houses for wealthy families in Connecticut, he had learned from an early age to become invisible when necessary. Boy, she always said, people like us only survive if we know when to speak and when to listen, and listening is always more valuable. At 18, he won a scholarship to study accounting, but had to drop out in his 3rd year when his grandmother fell ill. He worked 3 jobs to pay for her treatment, always promising himself he would return to his studies. Life had other plans. When he got the job at Sterling Holdings, it seemed like just another cleaning job. But something about the arrogance of those people, the way they treated employees like him, aroused a curiosity he couldn't ignore. He began to pay attention to conversations, documents left on desks, computers that stayed logged in during the night. Within 2 years, David had an understanding of Sterling Holdings' financial structure that rivaled that of many executives. The difference was that he saw the numbers without the filters of greed or privilege. On that Tuesday afternoon 3 months ago, he was cleaning the conference room when Victoria walked in with 5 executives to present the quarterly results. David continued to work quietly as he always did. Profits are 23% above projections, she announced proudly thanks to our restructuring of the public contracts division. David knew about that restructuring. He had seen the spreadsheets, the suspicious transfers, the overpriced contracts. He knew that 23% came from public money diverted through rigged bids. That's when one of the executives spilled coffee on the table right next to the documents. David immediately approached to clean it up. Stop right there, Victoria interrupted the presentation, irritated. Clean it up properly this time. It seems you can't even learn the simplest tasks. An awkward silence filled the room. The executives avoided looking at David, but no one protested. Some even smiled discreetly. I'm sorry, ma'am, David muttered, continuing to clean with slower, more deliberate movements. Pay attention, she continued, clearly satisfied with her audience. People like this only understand when we make it very clear where everyone stands. Low laughter echoed around the room. But what Victoria didn't realize was how David memorized every face, every name, every document visible on that table. At that moment, while feigning humility, he was mentally photographing evidence that would one day be used against them all. When he left the room, David didn't feel humiliated. He felt enlightened. He finally understood that people like Victoria Sterling only respected one language, power, and he had just decided it was time to learn to speak that language fluently. Now, 3 months later, watching Rachel leave Victoria's office with a pale face, David smiled inwardly. They thought the problem was just a janitor with too much information. Report on David. Did you find anything I can use? She asked, drumming her impatient fingers on the table. Marcus cleared his throat. Actually, Mrs. Sterling, his background is impressively clean. No criminal record, no significant debts, impeccable references from all previous employers. That's impossible, she exploded. Everyone has some skeletons in their closet. Look harder. There is one odd thing though, Marcus continued. He dropped out of accounting school in his junior year, but his grades were exceptional. Near-perfect scores in all subjects related to corporate finance and auditing. Victoria felt a chill run down her spine. Auditing. And there's more. I spoke with some colleagues in corporate security. Apparently, in the last 6 months, there has been a significant increase in the number of anonymous reports to federal agencies about large companies, all with extremely well-documented evidence. The phone almost slipped out of Victoria's hand. Do you think? I have no proof, but the profile matches. Someone with inside knowledge of corporate accounting, access to privileged information, and enough intelligence to compile legally valid evidence. 2 hours later, David was officially unemployed. But instead of going home, he took the subway downtown and entered a small cafe near the financial district. There, he met someone Victoria Sterling would never expect. James Mitchell, 52, a former FBI investigator specializing in corporate financial crimes, now worked as a freelance consultant for public interest organizations. Tall, gray-haired, and with a reputation for giving corrupt CEOs across the country sleepless nights. So David, James said, stirring his coffee slowly. You said in your email that you have information about Sterling Holdings. David discreetly placed a flash drive on the table. 3 years of evidence, internal documents, meeting recordings, compromising emails, records of suspicious transactions. The FBI gets money laundering and federal fraud, the IRS gets tax evasion. The SEC will love. James plugged the flash drive into his laptop and his eyes widened as he browsed through the files. This is a gold mine, money laundering, rigged contracts, industrial-scale tax evasion. There's more, David said calmly. Victoria Sterling isn't just the CEO. She's the mastermind behind a scheme that has siphoned off more than $200 million in public contracts over the last 5 years. How the hell did you get all this? David smiled for the first time in days. Rich people have a problem. They think employees like me are invisible. They discuss illegal business in front of me, leave confidential documents open on their desks, make compromising phone calls while I clean the room. James closed the laptop. Impressed, David, you realize that what you have here could destroy not only Victoria Sterling, but the entire board of directors. That's the idea, David replied. But I need someone who knows how to use this the right way, someone with contacts in the press, the FBI, the IRS. You've come to the right man. James extended his hand. But tell me something, why now? Why didn't you hand this over before? David shook his hand firmly. Because before I only had evidence. Now I have motivation. Victoria Sterling made the mistake of publicly humiliating me and then trying to destroy me. That made it personal. At that moment, David's phone vibrated. It was a message from Rachel. Victoria wants you to return your badge and collect your belongings today. Security will escort you. David showed the message to James, who shook his head. She has no idea what she just did, does she? No idea, David confirmed. She thinks firing me solves the problem. But what she doesn't know is that firing me was exactly what I needed to go public without a conflict of interest. James opened his laptop again. Okay, here's the plan. First, we'll organize these documents into specific categories for different agencies. Stock manipulation records. What about the press? David asked. I have contacts at the New York Times, Washington Post, and some investigative journalists who live for this kind of story. A Millionaire CEO brought down by evidence collected by the very janitor she humiliated. That's going to be on the front page of every newspaper in the country. David looked out the cafe window, watching the city bustle. You know what motivates me most about all this? It's not just personal revenge. It's for all the people who have been hurt by her schemes. The retirees who lost their pensions because of embezzled funds. The workers laid off to hide losses caused by money laundering. Are you sure you want to go through with this? James asked, closing his laptop again. Because once we set this in motion, there's no turning back. Victoria Sterling will use every resource she has to try to destroy you, David smiled. But now it was a different smile. It was the smile of someone who had spent 3 years preparing for this very moment. James, she's already tried to destroy me. The difference is that now she's done it officially, leaving documented traces of retaliation against a whistleblower. That only strengthens our case. The two stood up from the table. James carefully put away the flash drive. I'll start making the calls today, in 48 hours. Do you want this in the hands of all the relevant federal agencies? 48 hours is perfect, David confirmed. It gives her enough time to feel secure and victorious, and enough time for me to organize Phase 2 of the plan. Phase 2, James raised an eyebrow. David checked his watch. Victoria Sterling hasn't seen anything yet. She thinks firing me was her master stroke, but what she doesn't know is that for the past 6 months, I haven't just been gathering evidence on Sterling Holdings. He paused dramatically, watching James's curious expression. I've been building a network with other neglected employees at similar companies throughout Manhattan, and they all have stories to tell. The silence that followed was charged with possibilities. James realized he was witnessing something much bigger than simple personal revenge. David had orchestrated the beginning of a silent revolution against the corrupt corporate elite. "One last question," James said when they reached the cafe door. "How can you be sure Victoria doesn't suspect any of this?" David chuckled softly. "Because she's so blinded by her own arrogance that she can't see beyond her own nose. To her, I'm just a black janitor," she managed to silence, "and that arrogance will be exactly what destroys her." They left the cafe in opposite directions, James to launch an investigation that would shake Wall Street, David to execute a phase of revenge that Victoria Sterling could never imagine. But the question that echoed in the air was more intriguing than any answer. If Victoria Sterling thought she had won by firing David, how would she react when she discovered that her supposed victory was exactly the bait he needed to catch the big fish? Friday, 6:47 a.m., Victoria Sterling woke up to the insistent ringing of the phone. It was Marcus Wellington, his tense voice cutting through the morning silence. "Miss Sterling, we have a problem. Several problems, actually." She sat up in bed, still sleepy. "Marcus, it's almost 7 in the morning. This can wait." "No, it can't," he interrupted. "FBI agents are in the lobby of the company building. They have search and seizure warrants for all computers, financial files, and communication records from the last 5 years." Victoria's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Why? Investigation for money laundering, federal fraud, and corruption in public tenders. And there's more. The IRS is also here with a team of auditors and the SEC. "The SEC?" Victoria jumped out of bed and ran to the computer. "That doesn't make sense. Who the hell?" That's when she saw it. The front page of the New York Times Online displayed a headline that made her world collapse. "Cleaner reveals $1 million scheme. How fired black employee exposed $200 million fraud at Sterling Holdings." Her hands trembled as she clicked on the article. A photo of David Johnson appeared alongside an image of her leaving a gallery event, creating a devastating contrast between a humble worker and the millionaire executive. Mr. Johnson, 34, worked as a night janitor at Sterling Holdings for 3 years, the article read. During that time, he systematically collected evidence of a complex corruption scheme that included overpriced contracts, undeclared offshore accounts, and manipulation of public bids. The phone rang again. It was Rachel from Human Resources crying, "Victoria, have you seen the news? My phone won't stop ringing. Journalists wanting to know about David's dismissal, about racial discrimination, about retaliation against whistleblowers." Victoria hung up without answering and immediately called her personal lawyer. "Richard, I need you now." "Victoria, I'm watching the news," he replied, clearly concerned. "This is very serious. If half of these allegations are true, none of it is true," she shouted. "It's all made up by that deranged janitor." "Victoria, they have documents, your emails, transaction records, recordings of meetings. The FBI doesn't move like this without solid evidence." At that moment, she remembered something that made her choke. The meetings where they discussed the schemes. David was always cleaning the room. The password she typed without thinking while he vacuumed nearby. The document she left open on the table. Her phone vibrated with a Twitter notification. Her name was among the trending topics. Victoria Sterling, Sterling scandal, justice for David. She clicked on the first tweet and came across a video that took her breath away. He hung up. At that moment, Victoria looked out the window and saw something that made her shudder. Across the street, David Johnson stood in front of an office building surrounded by reporters. Even from a distance, she could see his posture, upright, dignified, controlled. A reporter was broadcasting live. "David Johnson continues to demonstrate the same class and dignity that have characterized him throughout this process. When we asked him about revenge," he replied, "this was never about revenge. It was about justice. It was about ensuring that other workers are not humiliated as I was." The camera focused on David's face and Victoria saw something that terrified her. There was no anger in his eyes. There was only the calm satisfaction of someone who had executed a perfect plan. "Was Miss Sterling also an employer who paid fair wages?" asked another journalist. David smiled slightly. "Well, considering she tried to destroy me professionally after I discovered her illegal activities, I think that answers your question." Victoria stepped away from the window, her legs wobbly. Her phone vibrated incessantly with calls from lawyers, journalists, and angry creditors. In 4 hours, she had lost her company, her reputation, her fortune, and any chance of rebuilding her career. Marcus entered one last time. "Victoria, I need your ID and access cards. Security will escort you out of the building." As she walked through the corridors she once ruled like a queen, Victoria passed the cleaning station where David kept his equipment. A small sign was stuck to the wall. "All honest work has dignity regardless of the uniform you wear." At the exit, she faced a crowd of reporters. The questions came like gunshots. Is it true that you called David incompetent? Why did you fire an exemplary employee? Will you apologize publicly? She ran to her car, but she already knew there was no escape. The internet never forgets, and her humiliation was being documented in real time, seen by millions. That night, in her empty apartment, the furniture was already being seized to cover debts. Victoria watched the news where David was being interviewed in a stylish studio wearing a simple but impeccable suit. "David, what would you say to other workers who face discrimination?" asked the anchor. He looked directly at the camera, and Victoria felt as if he were speaking specifically to her. "I would say that your dignity does not depend on the approval of those who discriminate against you, and that sometimes those who underestimate you are offering you the greatest opportunity of your lives, the opportunity to prove that they are much smaller than you will ever be." Victoria turned off the television, finally understanding the full extent of her defeat. David hadn't just destroyed her professionally, he had done something much worse. He had proven that all her arrogance based on prejudice was fundamentally wrong. But as she cried alone in her empty apartment, one question echoed in the silence. If David Johnson had managed to orchestrate the fall of an entire empire using only intelligence and patience, what kind of bright future awaited a man with such determination and strategic skills? 6 months later, David Johnson was sitting in a glass office in downtown Manhattan wearing his first executive suit. The FBI had hired him as a consultant specializing in corporate financial crimes with a salary 3 times what Victoria had ever paid him. "Your unique experience in detecting fraud from within companies is exactly what we needed," said the division director during the interview. "You can see what our conventional auditors don't see." On David's desk, stacks of cases similar to Sterling Holdings awaited his analysis. Corrupt Wall Street executives trembled just hearing his name. Victoria Sterling, meanwhile, lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in Queens, working part-time in telemarketing. Her bank accounts were frozen, her assets auctioned off to pay federal fines. The name that once opened doors now closed them instantly. "Convicted former CEO seeks employment," reported the local newspaper when she tried to work as a store manager, only to be rejected after a background check. One Thursday afternoon, their paths accidentally crossed on the subway. Victoria lowered her head, hoping he wouldn't recognize her, but David stopped politely. "Ms. Sterling." She looked up, expecting sarcasm or cruelty. Instead, she found the same calm dignity as always. "I hope you're doing well," he said simply before heading to his car. At that moment, Victoria finally understood. David had never fought to destroy her personally. He had fought for something greater so that no other worker would be humiliated as he had been. Today, David runs a national whistleblower protection program, turning his experience into systemic change. Victoria works as a night cleaner, a job that finally taught her the value of dignity in honest work. The best revenge was not to destroy those who had harmed him, but to build something greater than his oppressors could ever imagine. David proved that his dignity never depended on the approval of those who discriminated against him. If this story of transformation and justice has touched you, subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that show how intelligence and perseverance always overcome prejudice and arrogance.